Welcome to Promo Perspectives, a podcast presented by Sage, dedicated to giving promotional products, suppliers, and distributors tips, tricks, and insights to help them grow their businesses. I'm Gabe Gotai, Senior Marketing Coordinator here at Sage, joined today by Patrick Harvitt, Distributor Sales Team Lead.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thanks for coming. A long trip from the last time you were here 5 minutes ago.
Right, that's true.
Patrick and I, we just did a live stream of the main episode, which should already be out by the time you're listening to this, where we introduced the topic of fulfillment. We talked about gathering customer requirements and then some of the actual order process, like when do you take the orders, when do you submit the orders, how long is the store open, how do you deal with shipping, all these kinds of things. But in 30 minutes, we weren't going to cover everything. So we've got a couple more episodes. Today, it's just going to be Patrick and I again. We're going to be talking about inventory management and some of the differences between Sage Showrooms and Sage Stores. And then we've got a couple of more episodes coming out. We have 2 episodes where we have interviews with distributors and a 3rd episode where we're going to be interviewing a supplier. So you're really going to get all of the promo perspectives on the fulfillment topic.
The full spectrum.
That's right. So, Patrick, welcome back to the show.
Hey, I appreciate you having me, man.
Yeah. So let's kind of pick up where we left off. We had just finished talking about payment processing, and throughout that whole discussion, we kind of mentioned a handful of times inventory management, but it's kind of difficult to talk about that and everything else. So why don't we kick us off? You've mentioned in that last episode holding versus not holding inventory. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, usually the easiest way here is going to be holding inventory. So I think a lot of that is going to require some preliminary investigation, you know, kind of the things we talked about in the last episode, like how many people are going to be ordering, how many orders are we actually expecting? Because it has to make sense for you to either purchase that inventory up front, get your client to purchase that inventory up front, and then someone's got to hold it, right? So it's got to make sense. You know, oftentimes the distributor has, you know, a small office location, or they're holding it in their home, and some don't feel comfortable doing that. There are situations where the client is holding, like, let's say Sage is hanging on to a few extra shirts in case I tear one or lose one or something, and I'm heading off to a show. It can quickly be replaced. And then you have the other situation where you're working with like a third-party fulfillment center. So usually when I see that, I mean, we're talking big amounts of inventory to where there's just no other outlet outside of working with a fulfillment warehouse. So the other side of it would be not holding inventory at all. And I think kind of what we talked about in the previous episode, it's circumstantial based on what the customer's expectation is, how quick they need the products, you know, things like that. Because more often than not, the store is going to collect orders over a period of time, and then you're doing a bulk purchase to your vendor to fulfill. So there's really no reason to hold the inventory. You know, there might be a situation where, hey, the store is open year round, but we have hundreds and hundreds of people accessing it. So I'm not really worried about not hitting my minimum, so I don't need to hold inventory at that point. So
right. And well, and you know, what kind of taking it from the top there of like holding your own inventory, it does not take very long for the physical square footage of these products to add up.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, like, absolutely.
Even, you know, I think it's probably why pens are one of the most popular products, not only because they're so commonly used, but you can get a lot of pens in a pretty small box. But once you get up to, you know, the most popular things tend to be apparel. A box of shirts is usually, you know, like a 2.5 by 3 foot, you know, box that is gonna. I saw, you know, there's a couple of us here at Sage that are involved in music, and we have band merch. And even if you're really small and you're only getting like, you know, 72 to 140 something shirts at a time, that has to live somewhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of distributors, you know, are smaller businesses. Like even some of the bigger ones, we did an interview during the sustainability topic, and one of those distributors, they have no offices, right? Mm-hmm. They are just based out of their homes. And is that kind of a common thing for distributors?
Yeah, I would say most distributors that I speak with are smaller mom pop, you know, 2-man, 3-man shows, remote workers. Now, obviously, there's some distributors that are also screen printers or embroidery shops, so that's a little bit of a different process for them. You know, they actually have probably the capability to handle that type of thing. But most of them work out of their home, you know, so they're not necessarily wanting to keep the products there. You know, again, and that's where I would say do that investigative process ahead of time and figure out like, hey, do we actually even need to hold inventory? If I can tell my client, like, these products are going to be produced within 15 or 20 days, there's really no need. I think the Amazon effect has been kind of the blessing and the curse. It's a blessing for all of us because we get our stuff in 2 days, right? But then you have that expectation, and oftentimes you have to just have that conversation like, hey, this is branded, customized merchandise for your company. It's not sitting on the shelf already unless you purchase it up front.
Right, and that only works for Amazon because Amazon really is not a store business. They're a fulfillment business, and they have essentially become one of the largest fulfillment operations in the country, if not the world. And not every distributor is going to be able to do that. So you do have to manage customer expectations. And also what you said about, like, do you even need to hold inventory? That's why we started the last episode with gathering customer requirements. Like, we had somebody in the chat asked in the last episode, like, what do I do with extra merch? And, it's branded merchandise. You can't sell golf balls with the Sage logo to a different company.
Right.
Nobody's going to want that. So you have to either really work hard up front to make sure that you're only ordering what you need, or, you kind of, the recommendation you gave to the person that asked that question is if you end up with this extra inventory, you got to find some way to move it, right? You got to tell your customer, hey, you should push a discounted program or sell it to them at net price, all these kinds of things. And a lot of this can really be avoided by doing the gathering of requirements.
Oh, 100%.
Up front.
Yeah, 100%.
And that kind of hits on another thing that's in the inventory topic, which is order minimums. And not just hitting the order minimums, but making sure the order minimums are within, the capabilities of your operation.
Right. Yeah, because there's situations where people aren't holding inventory and they set up a store or something like an online ordering platform with a customer that only has 5 employees. Well, if you have to hit 25 shirts and you only have 5 employees, it's going to be a little tough. So, I think, again, kind of to fall back on what we've been preaching, which is get the information up front, set the expectations before you can actually decide, hey, how do I want to go about this with fulfillment? Am I going to hold the inventory as a client? Am I working with a 3PL? Or are we just going to forego the inventory altogether? So
we'll get into the 3PL in just a second here. But something, you said there, it's like if you're working with someone that's got 5 employees and they want shirts, what is the solution to that, customer?
At that point, I think the distributor would have to decide, like, would the store option even be a feasible option? Does it even make sense?
Right,
because something that small, the client may want, their own, I guess, online place to reorder, but it's got to make sense for the distributor too.
Right, because the store, it does cost to have the store. And that was another question that came up too, is somebody asked, should we charge for the store? And the answer to that's absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely. I always encourage people to charge for the stores, but there's some distributors that don't. So, but at the end of the day, I'm all about, like, you're providing them a service, right? So charge for the service that you're providing, whether it's just whatever you're paying Sage to run the store, because we're not going to bill your client directly, but.
Right. Well, okay, so let's move on to the 3PL, working with a warehousing company. Talk a little bit more about how that works, what options are available, and why you might go that route.
So I think for the most part, the only time I really see people working with fulfillment warehouses is when there's large quantities of items here. Like, it's beyond the reach of my client holding them or me holding them in my office or my garage or whatever. It's gotten to the point to where there's too many items, there's too many moving parts. So that would be the obvious one, right? There's large amounts of inventory, and rather than you taking the trip to the FedEx office or the UPS office 50 times a day to get rid of this stuff, the 3PLs will streamline that whole process. So I would say that's going to be the most obvious, and honestly probably really the only reason you would work with a fulfillment warehouse. The other would be like kitting and stuff. So a lot of the times new hire kits, organizations that do like employee appreciation, where they send you a box and there's a bag, there's a pen, there's a tumbler. rather than all of that stuff getting shipped to you and you actually kitting it. A lot of the times people will work with these third-party fulfillment warehouses or 3PLs that do kitting. So a lot of them do kitting where they can put a nice branded box, put all the items together for you, and then ship it out to the customer. So it's more than just the whole inventory side of things. It could be you're offering kits on there, and it just makes more sense for you to have that all shipped to one central location.
And we'll talk to in the next bonus episode where we're going to have Jill and Michael from Corporate Pride, because Michael has a separate warehousing company. And it's interesting because they don't actually even use that right now for all of the orders they do through Corporate Pride, because it doesn't necessarily make sense. But he talks about some examples where some of the stores they have might be moving to that option.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it also, like, keep harping on this, it ties back to the importance of customer requirement gathering, because if you do that appropriately, you should know up front if that's a service you're going to have to use, because that's something you're going to need to consider in the cost of the store and the cost of the products.
100%. Absolutely. Because now, I mean, the warehousing isn't going to be free.
No.
No doubt.
And, it might not be, I think people might be intimidated at the idea of having to pay a whole other business, but there's an economy of scales here too, right? Where what you would have to pay individually, either in, space and sanity in your home, or in, like you said, driving to and from FedEx, UPS, or other freight management companies, your gas and time to do that. And beyond that, what you're paying to FedEx and UPS is likely going to be more than what a warehouse is paying, because they're sending probably whole trucks of things out to the distribution centers.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting. So, there's a lot of options out there, and I guess is Google just kind of be the best route to find that kind of thing?
Well, there is a fulfillment services tab that you can take a look at in Sage. So, like, there's a category search that you could do. I think there's a few in there. I know there's definitely some kitting services that y'all can take a look at. But that would be my suggestion, is take a look at those, see what companies are there. Odds are there's probably some kind of fulfillment warehouse on every other corner, maybe not every other corner, but every city that you could potentially work with. It's not uncommon that companies are using them for promotional items, for apparel items, things like that. So,
all right. Well, before we move on from inventory, any other thoughts? Or should we move on to the store's showrooms?
I would just say, we talked briefly on this, in the previous episode, like, regardless of what route you go, keep it simple, work with your best vendors for that particular type of item. So I think where people get in the gray area is where they have a million product options, because that's either going to require a million pieces of inventory, or you juggling all sorts of different moving parts if you're not holding inventory. What happens when the vendor's out of stock, or it's on back order, or the product gets discontinued? So I usually tell people, keep it simple, less is good.
Right. Well, and this is why distributors exist in the supply chain, right?
Right, exactly.
To come up with the solutions, to make the best choices on how you're ordering from the manufacturers, and, present these options to the end buyer.
100%. But we do get end buyers want this, that, or the other, and to the moon. So bringing them back to earth sometimes. Don't be scared of that, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and customers are always easy to deal with, right? We know this.
Sure.
All right. Well, then let's move on to showrooms versus stores. And again, this is another thing that's going to come up a bit in the Corporate Pride episode, because there are some pretty significant differences in the uses for both, and there can even be kind of a pathway from one to the other depending on what it is. So why don't we just start off basically, what are the similarities and differences between our Sage showrooms and our Sage stores?
Okay, so I'll start with the store, just because it's probably the simplest explanation and the least confusing. The stores are obviously their own standalone website, so your client has their specific URL they're going to, and then the whole website is branded to them and only populated with their branded merch, right? And then that store also has its unique cart settings. So whether they're doing credit card payments or invoice request or payroll deduction, like we talked about the last episode, or promo codes or whatever, that store has its own standalone cart functions. Now, the showrooms, though similar, are different. They're actually hosted on your Sage website. So if you have a professional or professional plus website with us, you have access to build unlimited showrooms. So part of what people have done is they've created client-specific showrooms. So think of it as a landing page on your website that's only populated with your client's products. So it's still living on your website. They're still going to see your header and your logo, and they could browse whatever they want to browse. Maybe they want to read your blog while they're looking at their showroom. So that's kind of number one. The store is standalone. The showroom lives on your site. Now, it doesn't mean you can't make it more private. You can hide it from public access. You can password protect it, all that stuff. Where people, I think, get in the gray area is they're trying to execute a showroom exactly like a store, and then they run into a situation where there's a payroll deduction payment need, or this client wants to incorporate employee allowances or something. Because what that's going to ultimately do, if other people are checking out on your website, or you guys have the add to cart function allowed on your website, when they get to the end, it's going to also give that customer a payroll deduction option to pay. So it's like, that's where there can be some gray area. If it's simple, easy credit card transactions, probably not a problem. I guess the only thing to be mindful of is, they still are accessing your website. So a lot of the times a school, like let's say a university where students are actually ordering, the university wants their own site. They don't want their students going to the promotional product distributor's website. So
right. Well, and you kind of just started doing this just there, but the next thing I wanted to ask you, can you give me an example for each case of something that should definitely be a store, something that should probably be a showroom, and if you have any examples of something that might start as a showroom and evolve into a full store?
Sure. So something that should definitely be a store, I would say, like we talked about this, like a charity event giveaway item or something, where you kind of want the whole standalone site feel that's labeled to that charity organization. There's no kind of intertwinement between the product that they're offering and the promotional product distributor. I know a lot of people will probably hate me for saying that, because it's like, well, what if that person's a small business owner and they're coming to my website now? So I would say it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, but in reality, you probably need to have that as its own standalone store. Or if there's any kind of crazy cart function outside of like credit card payments. So I think more and more with corporations, we're seeing that employee credit or employee allowance option or promo codes for new hires. You're definitely going to want to go to the store on that route. Right. On a showroom side of things, like let's say my customer reorders the same pens 3 times a year, and that's really all they order. Start out with a showroom. It's free. Put that showroom there, and anytime they need to reorder it, they just go to their portal and reorder it. Ultimately, what that can turn into, and kind of where this leads, as I guess a showroom can be like an introductory stage to a store, is they've now gotten used to that ordering process, but want to start incorporating other things like apparel and maybe printed flyers or whatever else, because you could put any product in there. So you're kind of warming them up for the big leagues, I guess.
Right. And it's an easy way, and this is something Jill's talks about in that episode that's coming out, is like, it's very easy to just set up a showroom just to demonstrate the value to the client, which makes it like a marketing tool.
Right.
And then, like you said, that can evolve into a store. And that thing you said earlier about like there's a potential distributor who might be a little upset that their branding is on a store, because what if that person who comes to order from a charity is a small business and they see me? It's like, well, what's your actual goal with this, right? Mm-hmm. Is your goal to provide an excellent service to this charity and secure repeat business every time they do this 5K in a different market? Or is your goal to put your name in front of as many small businesses as possible?
Exactly.
Because I think there should be a priority balance there.
Oh, for sure. And I would agree.
All right. Well, are there any other thoughts that you have on showrooms versus stores? That's
honestly really all I can think of. I mean, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, talk to your Sage rep. If there's still some fuzziness to the concepts, talk to your Sage rep. We can walk you through it and even show you a few examples. So, but no, other than that, I think that's pretty much it.
Well, and like Patrick just said, this is what your reps are here for. We also have all kinds of great educational materials in the knowledge base in sagemember.com. Log in with your Sage credentials there. Got videos, got articles, but like you said, your number one resource is going to be your account advisor. That's what they're here for. And let them give you a walkthrough and a demo, because they can probably open your mind to some ideas that you hadn't had yet to set up these stores, identify the clients in your books already that could use these stores, and really, set up repeat business and grow your business, because that's what we're all here to do.
Hey, that's the end goal, right?
Yeah. All right, well, thanks, y'all. This is the end of this first bonus episode on fulfillment. All the rest of the episodes are going to be interviews with actual distributors and suppliers in the industry, so you can see how some people are really doing it and get a more well-rounded perspective. Thanks, Patrick, for joining us.
I appreciate it.
See you on the next one.